How do we know who we are and what our purpose is to fulfill in this world? Well, it's the stories and it's the archetypes that help us. The warrior and the poet, the sword and the rose. And these archetypes, they're guide star. They're the lodestar in the night sky. And so without the balance of these two archetypes, I think that we can get lost. Every experience that you have, if you learn from it, you can choose to be grateful. What if everything that's happening in the present, we know that we're going to be grateful for it, we just don't know why yet? To devote to your art. That which you bring forth will save you, and that which you do not will destroy you. Bringing forth that thing that will not only help serve the world, but will actually save themselves. Being the artist that's painting the masterpiece of their own life, the hero living their own story. Commit to the fight. We have a battle, and the battle is with ourselves. Fight the fight that only you can fight. When you're enthusiastic about the fight, that's contagious. That's what allows you to become a leader. And that's when you're just filled with that Evander Holyfield enthusiasm, and you wouldn't do anything else, and you wouldn't trade your life for any other life. You're gonna get your ass kicked. It's just part of life. The times where we fall, the times where we're crushed and broken, those are the times that actually define the warrior and continue your mission to be the very best person that you can possibly be. Our lives are guided by archetypes. It helps us set what Jordan Peterson would call our aim, or what I would call our unique mission. How do we know who we are and what our purpose is to fulfill in this world? Well, it's the stories and it's the archetypes that help us. Now, one of the famous archetypes is king, warrior, magician, lover. And obviously that's tilted towards the masculine, but you could just as easily apply queen, warrior, magician, lover. I would add a fifth, mystic, and I would add a sixth as poet. Now, these archetypes, then, as you look at them through the lens of yourself, you can start to ask, which ones do I want to embody? And from a very early age, two of them emerged, warrior and poet. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the archetypes of the king or the lover or the magician or the mystic, but fundamentally, the warrior poet has been the synthesis of two of these opposing, in some ways of looking at it, two of these opposing ideas, a warrior and a poet. We don't often think of them as being able to be embodied in a single person, but of course they are. And some of the great stories have illuminated that. Now, the first story where I actually heard the word was, of course, Braveheart. And if you think of William Wallace, he first just wanted to learn how to wield the sword. He had some revenge that was on his mind because his father was slain by the tyrannical rule of Edward the Longshanks, and he wanted to learn the way of his sword. But the Uncle Argyll, which in the hero's journey represents the meeting of the mentor, he said, first, I'm going to teach you how to use this, your mind. And then I'm going to teach you how to use the sword. And so William Wallace goes on his adventure and he learns Latin and he learns French and he learns different languages and battle strategies. And he also learns how to use the sword. And he seemed content to just actually be a lover, even though inside him moved the spirit of the warrior and inside him moved the spirit of the poet. But really, what happened was, of course, for anybody who watched the movie, his lover was slain, and then he had to step fully into the warrior archetype, but never losing the poet archetype, which is the one who deeply feels. So the warrior is the one who's willing to stand for everything that he or she believes and fight for it. It's the willingness to protect those that need protection and to actually stand for the good, the true, and the beautiful. When I was recently doing a podcast with the samurai Kitano Sensei, he talked about how all of the samurai training was designed for the purpose of protecting. And so even when they're in battle, single combat, they're imagining all of the people that they're protecting behind them. And in the imagining of the people you're protecting behind you, you have so much more power. It's why every battle strategist or tactician knows that it's much harder to take over somebody else's homeland than it is to protect your own homeland. Now, of course, if you have a sufficient army, you're obviously still able to conquer. But nonetheless, people, when they're fighting to protect, there's a different spirit that moves through them. And I would say that that's the spirit of the poet. They feel the love that they have for those that they're protecting, their lovers, their parents, their children, and the ethos of their culture that they're fighting to protect for. So the warrior, once again, is there to actually stand and fight for everything that they believe in. And the symbol of that is, in my mind, the best symbol is the sword. And the poet is willing to feel everything, to give them the true motivation to feel not only what's moving within themselves, but also moving and animating their body to stand for value and to feel the whole. Why are you fighting? What are you fighting for? And so without the balance of these two archetypes, I think that we can get lost. And I think there's either an overemphasis on the warrior or an overemphasis on the sensitivity of the poet. But when you merge both of those, you get something that's really unique and beautiful, which is why my first 200 episodes of my podcast were the Warrior Poet Project. I was actually coming out saying, look, I want to bring all of these things together, the ability to feel and the ability to fight. And this was also echoed in other heroes that I studied. Miyamoto Musashi. Dozens and dozens of duels to the death with the sword. One of the greatest swordsmen that ever lived, perhaps the greatest swordsman that ever lived. He was the GOAT. But also he was a writer. He wrote the Book of Five Rings. He was also a calligrapher. And he would spend his time not only training with the sword, but training how to make just the right brushstroke, feeling the essence of the spirit that animates life moving through his brush. And also Socrates. Think of Socrates. And everybody thinks, oh, he was a philosopher. And, that idea of philosophy is not exactly the poet, but it's an element of that poetry that actually moved through him, that shifted Western culture. But if you read the accounts of Socrates, he was a fierce warrior. And there's a story of when his beloved friend Alcibiades was in trouble and actually surrounded by the enemy, Socrates broke out of the ranks and like a fierce lion was just there to stand in front of Alcibiades to allow him to gather himself and retreat back to safety. So the stories of Socrates' heroism in battle are often lost because what's been emphasized over time is actually what he contributed to the collective zeitgeist through his philosophy. But he was a warrior poet. And I think many of the great thinkers and many of the great leaders that we have embody both of these elements, the ability to feel and the ability to fight. So I distilled this down into 5 essential tenets. And in this first solocast, which is actually a chapter in my new upcoming book, You versus Anti-You, which will be out in 2025, it's a whole chapter. But we're going to take just the first 3 tenets of the 5 of the warrior poet ethos. So the first 3 tenets of the warrior poet ethos. Number 1, choose to be grateful. Number 2, devote to your art. And number 3, commit to the fight. Now, in a subsequent podcast, we're going to talk about the last 2 tenets, which are deeply rich and also important, which is celebrate your victories and grieve your losses. And finally, the 5th tenet, keep your word to yourself. But in this podcast, we're just going to be talking about the first 3. And again, the first one of these, choose to be grateful. Now, gratitude is something that we can just naturally feel. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon. But when you add the act of choice, your own will to choose to be grateful, that's where the real power lies. And this is actually one of the famous rants from Jocko Willink, where he was talking about all of the shitty things that were happening. Like this bad thing happened, and he says, good. This other bad thing happened, he says, good. This next bad thing happened, good. What is he doing there? He's choosing to be grateful, not only for the good things that naturally instill gratitude, like, wow, I did this scratch off lotto ticket and I won the jackpot. Wow, I'm grateful. Of course, that's going to happen. But choosing to be grateful means not to just choose to be grateful for those good things that happen, but to choose to be grateful for the bad things that happen. Because when you choose to be grateful for those, when you know yourself as somebody that has grown and responded to those challenges, that's what actually facilitates our greatest growth and our greatest potential. It's the struggles, it's the challenges, it's the losses that define who we are. They're the diamond grindstone that sharpens the sword of our soul. And it's a choice to be grateful. So one of the things I say about a psychedelic medicine journey, and for those of you who follow me know that I've been deep in this path for 25 years, I say there's no such thing as a bad trip. That's something that you would have to choose to say was a bad trip, because every experience that you have, if you learn from it, if you grow from it, you can choose to be grateful. So it's the ultimate process of alchemy, turning lead into gold. And really, if we look back at our own lives with perfect hindsight, we can say, yeah, I'm grateful for everything. And now there's some things that are hard and there's some things we wish didn't happen. And we can't change that. But what we can change is our attitude toward those, even the hardest things that you can imagine. And there are some things that it's really difficult to imagine how to do that. I remember when Bobby Kennedy, who's suffered so much tragedy in his life, he was asking his mother, how do you deal with this much pain? How do you deal with this much loss? And what her answer is that instead you feel all the pain like the poet, but you enlarge your heart. You allow your heart to expand and enlarge as your response, so that you don't shrink from the pain, you actually grow from the pain. And I think there's deep wisdom in that. I remember when my cousin Eric was killed by a drunk driver in a car crash. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced. I was a teenager and I just pulled over to the side of the road when I heard, and I just wept and wept and wept. How do I choose to be grateful for that? Well, it's difficult, but what I can do and what I have done is choose to embody the spirit that he actually transmitted to me and live with him in my own actions and in my own life, and also bring awareness to the dangers of doing something like drunk driving, right? It's just like you can learn these lessons and actually make anything. Even though I would never want that to happen, it did happen. And so I can apply gratitude to be able to unlock the growth that's possible. So it's a choice not about saying, I hate the saying that everything happens for a reason. I actually don't necessarily know that I agree with that. Now, maybe that's true, but to me, it's only true if you give it a reason. Everything happens for a reason when you give it a reason. And the start of giving it a reason is the choice to be grateful. The choice to say, this happened to me. I'm not a victim. I'm going to use this to actually propel me forward to the greatest potential that's available to me. And that's the choice to be grateful. So again, looking back at our whole lives, most of these things, even the hardest ones, we can say like, yeah, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. So that's hindsight. In hindsight, you can say like, yeah, I'm grateful that this thing happened with my partner. I'm grateful that I failed in this business. I'm grateful that this thing happened. So that's hindsight. But what if we have hindsight as foresight? What if everything that's happening in the present, we know that we're going to be grateful for it? We just don't know why yet. I remember that when I got in my car accident, when I was like 38, it was 2018. And I got in this car crash that I had no idea how it happened. I just lost consciousness, middle of the day, no substances. This was no fault of my own, but for whatever reason, I just had a blink out of consciousness, and I accelerated into a guardrail, and the twisted steel of the guardrail cut through my car and split my face open. I still can't feel this side of my face. Killed one of my teeth. I got a black tooth. I got a nose that looks like the hunchback of Nostradamus. I got all kinds of things that happened from that experience. And I remember waking up and coming to with the jaws of life cutting open my car. And then I came back again to consciousness when I was in the hospital room. And I just had this overwhelming sense that whatever happened, it happened for me and not to me. And so I chose to be grateful for it. Now, it took me many, many years to actually understand why I was grateful for that, because I still, every time I shave my face, I feel the tingles. Every time I go and look in the mirror, I see the damage that I've taken. But my choice to be grateful was to really listen to what that showed me about life. One, the fragility of life, bringing death close, which is another lesson of these great warrior cultures. Like, this could be our final moment. This could be the last time we get to say, I love you to anybody that we love. It could be the last time that we see our parents. It could be the last time that we see our friends. So to live in that perpetual state of actually settling your affairs and being in the love and gratitude of our own lives is so important. It's really what Crazy Horse was saying when he said, Nake nula waung, I'm ready for whatever's next. It's this, today is a good day to die attitude, which means I don't wish for death, but actually if it was to come, then all of my affairs are settled. So my car accident was able to instill that deeper understanding that I want to live my life in a way that if today is my last day, Nake nula waung, I'm ready for whatever's next. Because I've said all the I love yous, I've contributed the best that I can to the world. And even though I've made so many mistakes, I've given the best and highest to the highest that's available, to the highest potential of my own soul and to the highest potential of the world at large. So choosing to be grateful is one of the most powerful acts that a warrior poet can actually employ. And that's why it's tenet number one, because you cannot be both a victim and a master at the same time. And if you're a victim, which means that things are happening to you and you're not grateful for them, then you're a victim. But victim actually disempowers you. It makes you impotent. And your power as a victim comes from the powerlessness that you claim as a victim. But if you want to harness your own personal power, then you have to say, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. Just like Jocko Willink. Good. And that attitude will then drive you forward through whatever challenges you have in life and actually give your life a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose that unlocks. And again, it doesn't mean that you wish it happened the same way, but it did happen. So now what are you going to do about it? And that's where the choice to become grateful is so important. The second tenet of the warrior poet ethos is to devote to your art. And in the Gospel of Thomas, verse 70, Thomas is basically saying, that which you bring forth will save you, and that which you do not will destroy you. And I've applied this to the warrior poet ethos to mean your art. Your art is the expression of your irreducible uniqueness in a way that people can actually get a lens into what's moving through you. Now, many of us might not think that we're an artist, but of course we are. We're an artist. Every time we get dressed in the morning, we're decorating ourselves, the costume of this identity that we have. So your art could be how you look, how you appear. The art could be how you speak. Or you could be a musician or a painter or a poet or a singer or a dancer. But we're always committing acts of art. And when we really look at that and devote to the art that we're offering the world, it's something incredibly powerful. Art is a gift. And the beauty of that gift is not only what you create, but who you are. And this is a principle that comes from the Toltec philosophy that was transmitted to Carlos Castaneda from Don Juan. And what they were talking about is that there's two different types of people. And Don Miguel Ruiz talks about this as well. There are the tonal, which is the ordinary folk. And then there's the nagual, which is the master who paints the masterpiece of their own life. So the difference in their mind is that there's an individual who does not bring forth that which will save them, does not bring forth their art. And in the not bringing forth their art, there's something that will eat them alive. And so all of the people who haven't shared their song, shared their poetry, shared their art, or living the truest potential of who they are, they're not bringing forth that thing that will not only help serve the world, but will actually save themselves. So all of these hard things that I talked about to be grateful for, one of the ways that you can process them and be grateful for them is if you turn them to art. Like the hardest, most challenging relationship scenarios have brought out my most beautiful poetry, as well as the most incredible ecstatic experiences. Both of these things have brought out my best art. And so that's another way to be grateful and actually alchemize the heavy, dense, difficult things in your life as you pour them into your art. And you see that in all of the great music, all of the great poetry, all of the great stories. There's this immense energy that's released when you actually turn your own personal struggles into art. And you see it with comics as well. Oftentimes their comedy comes from encountering, like a poet, the real difficulties that they've experienced in their life. And their art is comedy. So they're able to actually transmute that and alchemize that into laughter that they can share with the rest of the world. And this is the path of the artist. And this requires the poet who really allows themselves to feel everything that needs to be felt. Feel it all the way to the depth. Like, don't just feel the surface structure of what you're feeling and mask it with alcohol or painkillers or something to numb the pain. No, really feel the pain and the struggle and the challenge, or really feel the beauty and the love and the eros that you're feeling. So really feel it and then turn that feeling into art. Apply it to something that you can share with the world. And that could just be the expression of yourself in total, being a living masterpiece, being the artist that's painting the masterpiece of their own life, the hero living their own story, or it could be some tangible pieces of art. And I believe that all of us have the potential to do more than just live our own life as the canvas in which we're painting the art and the masterpiece of our own life, but also to create art. And so I really encourage everybody to find some artistic expression that suits them. It could be on the drums. I used to think that I had absolutely no musical ability, and still, to be honest, I have very little musical ability. But when I first got my first Native American flute and started to play it, it was terrible. But I started to get a little bit better at it. And it started to be finally at least somewhat pleasant when I would play it for other people. And so while I'll never be a great musician, transferring that emotion that was moving through me into even playing the flute or the harmonica or even a little drum beat on the drums, it makes a difference. I feel more alive. So this is not only a practice of what you're giving the world, it's something that'll save yourself. It's something that will actually allow you to be the hero of your story and allow you a reason to be grateful. The moment you start turning your hardships into art, the hardships have a purpose. They have a reason. And part of that purpose is that they can be helpful for other people. It's one of the reasons why I always share my most difficult stories, because in the sharing of my most difficult stories, that helps me become, again, back to tenet number 1, grateful for what happened, because I'm grateful for the art that I'm sharing, because I'm grateful that I'm able to share something that will help other people. So for me, poetry has been the main thrust of my art. Of course, podcasting, and there's other forms of my art, but poetry has been one of my favorite forms. And for me, that's a way that I can tap into the deepest emotions, or even imagine the emotions of other people, feel the collective, suffering of women or suffering of people who've been under the influence of darker forces and energies, which again, my book, You versus Anti-You, talks about these internal forces of resistance. And Stephen Pressfield talks about this a lot in his book, The War of Art. What he talks about in The War of Art is that there's a force that he calls resistance with a capital R, And this force is always trying to prevent you from releasing your art, creating your art. So if this force called resistance is resisting you from creating your art, and in my distillation of this force, which I've gotten from Paul Levy's work on Wetiko, my own psychonautic journeys, the great wisdom traditions, the Kabbalist idea of Sitra Achra, there's a force that's pulling against our actualization. And one of the vectors that this force that I call anti-you is working the hardest to prevent you from doing, it's creating your art. Because in creating your art, as the Gospel of Thomas says, that which you bring forth will save you. It will save you from those darker forces and actually allow you to be the person that you were always destined to be. So to devote to your art is both the warrior who has the courage to have people say, oh, your art sucks, oh, cringe, oh, whatever all of those things are. That's just their anti-you moving through them, projecting it onto you because they're scared to release their own art. They're scared to be vulnerable enough to feel what needs to be felt, transmute it, and share it. They'd rather be a victim, and they'd rather be in that consciousness where they're not grateful, and they'd rather keep everybody else in that same position. No real artist ever looks at another artist and tries to tear them down. Never, never. So all of the people that might try to tear you down when you devote to your art, they're not artists. They're not Naguals, and they're just the externalized voices of our own internal resistance. So devoting to your art is one of the key principles of the warrior poet ethos and is tenet number 2. Tenet number 3, commit to the fight. We have a battle, and the battle is with ourselves. If you want to find the devil, you can go look right in the mirror. There's that force of anti-you, there's that force of resistance, and we all know it. If there wasn't that force of resistance, then we would always be doing what we know we should do. We would always stick to our diets instead of 90% of people, rescinding their New Year's Eve commitments. And by like February, everybody would just make a New Year's Eve declaration. This is what I'm going to do this year. And they would just do it. But we don't. Why? Well, in my mind, it's because there is this force of resistance that's pulling against us. And so we have to commit to that fight to overcome those forces of resistance within. And so really what I'm talking about here is not fighting externally. Now, there may be things that we need to fight for externally, and that's part of the warrior to protect, yourself and those you love against these forces. But really the fight is an internal fight. And that's what I mean when I say commit to the fight. During my 11-year tenure with Onnit, we created a lot of revolutionary formulas, none more revolutionary than our flagship Alpha Brain. It's a product that I take every single day, still to this day. And then after I sold Onnit in 2021, I came across a particular ingredient. It's a metabolite of caffeine, which means that it's something that the body naturally breaks caffeine down into. And it's called paraxanthine. And then I found that ingredient and I said, this is doing a lot of what I wish caffeine would do, but it's not having the negative effects that I experience with caffeine. It's making me feel more alive, more energized, more clear in my mind, but it's also not sending me down that caffeine roller coaster. And then I said, what if we surrounded this with the best natural ingredients to create a really revolutionary formula? And we did it. And so I created a new company called Correct with a K, housed on correct.life, called Correct Energy. And it's absolutely as much of a revolution as Alpha Brain ever was. Alpha Brain worked on the acetylcholine neurotransmitter designed to give you more focus, and this works on the dopamine pathway, which is really like the go mechanism for the body. So whether you're working out, working hard, writing, anything that you're doing, playing with your kids, Correct Energy is going to be an absolute revolution in how you're able to interact with life with the vim and vigor and passion that you know is truly you. One of the things about this product is it just feels like you have more of you available. doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change your mindset. It just gives you more of the best of yourself. So if you're interested, check it out at correct.life. So within this tenet, I have an acronym that I use, and the acronym is NEVER, NEVER. And these are the 5 components of what it looks like to commit to the fight against that internal force of resistance, that force of anti-you. So the first one is non-compliance, right? So when that voice comes in your head and it starts telling you you're a piece of shit and telling you all of the terrible things, just think for a moment about all of the worst things that you've told yourself, right? Like all of the degrading things, all of the ways that you've beat yourself up. All of those things are the force of anti-you. They're not helping you. We may think that they're helping us. And internal family systems, they may call that a protector part or whatever it is. But I see something even deeper. I see this universal force of resistance that's resisting us, as Stephen Pressfield says, anytime we're going from a lower place to a higher place. So the first thing is non-compliance. And that's summed up very well, again, by Jesus saying to Satan, "Get thee behind me, Satan." In other words, not today, Satan. Not today, anti-you. Non-compliance. Do not go along with those forces that are compelling you to slip deeper into your addictions, to scroll on Instagram when you know you have work to do, to not talk to that person who you know you need to talk to. Do not comply with those forces of resistance. Don't comply with the forces that are saying, oh, you shouldn't release your art because you might get some hate from it. Non-compliance with that force of resistance I call anti-you is the first step. And that requires a certain level of awareness. You have to understand what I call your potential is, and then what your anti-you, the anti-potential, and the contest that you're in between those two forces. And just say, I will not comply with those negative voices in my head. I will not comply with the inner critic. I will not allow myself to slip into this decline. So the first of the acronyms, N, non-compliance. The next is energy. One of the wisest things that Maestro Hamilton Souther shared with me, and he was talking about it in the context of psychedelic journeys, but also in life. He said, energy levels matter. It's so much easier to be defeated if you don't have energy. And one of the great sayings that I learned from my boxing coach, and also I think is a quote from potentially Vince Lombardi, is fatigue makes cowards of us all. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. So the warrior poet needs courage, right? So courage is the antidote to fear. But fatigue, not having enough energy, makes cowards of us all. So if we understand that, then we have to support our energetic systems. And that's not just physical energy, that's also psychic and mental and spiritual energy. We have to have the energy to confront the resistance that we're inevitably going to face. So taking care of your energy is absolutely vital. And that goes down to everything I talked about in my first book, Own the Day, Own Your Life. It's really about collecting that vital life force energy. So the first thing you do when you wake up, you get sunlight on your skin and in your eyes, you get movement, you hydrate with enough. I use the morning mineral cocktail of, water and sea salt and lemon, or sometimes ketones, which is a particular type of seawater, but this hydration drink. Get yourself hydrated first, get some light, get some movement. All right, that's going to start you on the energetic process. Then when you go to your shower, take a cold shower, not a hot shower. At least do the cold part first and actually wake yourself up, give yourself energy. And one of the great benefits of cold therapy is it'll actually train your mitochondria, which are the little energy power sources in your body. It's actually like a workout for your mitochondria, because as you're warming up, your mitochondria have to heat to actually push heat back into your body. So it's a workout for your mitochondria. So while you may be using some energy to get in to the cold plunge, just like you use energy when you work out in the gym, you're going to end up with a surplus because you're going to have more energy later. And a lot of times, spiritual energy just requires rest. Like you got to allow yourself a place, whether it's your meditation or whether it's taking a nap. Another thing I talk about in Own the Day is the benefit and virtue of taking these 30-minute power naps, sometimes with binaural beats or however you do it, but replenishing your spiritual energy and then also ending those cycles that are depleting your energy, which goes back to non-compliance. If you're not complying with that voice that's beating you up or that voice that's slipping more into fear and you don't comply with that, you're going to have more energetic resources to fight the fight that only you can fight. And that's the internal battle to become the best version of yourself. So the second of the acronym, E, energy. V, vigilance. So this goes back to a level of awareness again, which is part of non-compliance because you have to be vigilant about what is actually happening and aware. But there's also a deeper principle here for vigilance that I want to talk about. One of the things from the Kybalion, which is a distillation of the 7 hermetic principles that govern the universe, is the principle of rhythm. And in the principle of rhythm, what they're saying is that when you reach a high, there's going to be a corresponding low. Everything moves in the universe like a sine wave. And a sine wave has its peaks and it has its valleys. And so understanding that, what the Kybalion says, the hermetic wisdom that was distilled for thousands of years and emerged in a book right at the turn of the 20th century, is saying that being aware of this natural rhythm, if you have a high moment, if you have a big moment, be vigilant that anti-you and the universe moving through anti-you is going to come at you and try to take you down to a deeper low. So that vigilance and awareness of the principle of rhythm, what the Kybalion says, is you actually place your identity into the state of pure awareness, so that what's happening to you, you're not allowing it to actually take you on that ride. So after a big high, you almost retreat to a sanctuary of awareness so that whatever happens, you're ready for it, number one, you're vigilant, and then you've actually identified and put yourself in that place where like, okay, I see what's happening here. I'm going to be grateful for all of this. This is normal. This is usual. And we're on our way. So vigilance is not only being aware of these antagonistic forces that live within us that I call anti-you, but also being aware of the principle of rhythm. So if you have a great ecstatic moment, just keep a lookout. It doesn't mean you don't enjoy the ecstatic moment. Live it fully. It doesn't mean you don't go for a high moment. Of course, we want that. And the poet actually says, like, I want the highs and I want the lows because I'm grateful for all of it. And I want the maximum human experience that's possible. But within that, there's a level of vigilance so you don't get taken out. The next one, again, we're using the acronym NEVER. So the next one is another E, and that one's enthusiasm. So the etymology of enthusiasm is actually bringing forth the divine within. Theo is thous, so that's the God within. So it's like this divine energy that moves through you, where you're actually merged with the field of eros and aliveness and joy and just pure awe and wonder in the ability that we have to live such a beautiful life in this beautiful planet. So enthusiasm is a key thing to the fight, because if you're fighting, you're like, oh, I can't believe I got to do this. I can't believe that I have to, work this hard, or I can't believe I have to. Then you're back in that victim mentality and you're not enthusiastic about what you do. So enthusiasm is, again, a skill, not just an experience that you have. It's something that you can train. And one of the paths that I think is helpful to getting towards enthusiasm comes from Eckhart Tolle in his book, A New Earth. And what he talks about is the first step is acceptance. So you get to acceptance, like I accept what I have to do. I accept the fight. So the first thing you do is you accept. And that's level 1. And we're building towards enthusiasm. Acceptance. Level 2, enjoyment. Like, all right, motherfucker. All right. Like we're in a fight. Let's go. And you start to actually enjoy the fight itself, right? You enjoy, like, I enjoy this. Embrace the grind, embrace the struggle. That's one of the things that Daniel Cormier was talking about, like embrace the grind, like enjoy the grind, enjoy the struggle. And the last one is enthusiasm. And that's when you're just filled with that Evander Holyfield enthusiasm. Like you're out there doing the thing that you're born to do, and you wouldn't do anything else, and you wouldn't trade your life for any other life. And when you get to that point as a warrior poet, where you're enthusiastic about the fight, again, this is all under the umbrella of Tenet 3, commit to the fight. When you're enthusiastic about the fight, that's contagious. That's what allows you to become a leader, because enthusiasm is the most contagious thing on the planet. If you're enthusiastically playing a game, other people will be enthusiastic about the game. If you're not, if you're just kind of phoning it in, then everybody else will phone it in too. And you see this in any kind of recreational sport you're playing, but those are just little models that model the bigger fights that we have in life. So practicing, cultivating that spirit of enthusiasm is a key principle to committing to the fight and also the warrior poet ethos. Finally, R, resilience. You're going to get your ass kicked. It's just part of life. Nobody gets through unscathed. Now, of course, there are those rare few fighters and individuals whose record is undefeated till the day they retire, that Floyd Mayweather record. But it doesn't mean that he hasn't got his ass kicked in many other ways. Doesn't mean that he hasn't had to be resilient. Doesn't mean he hasn't had to overcome injuries. All of these practices of resilience is really about like cowboy up. Get back on the horse. You get thrown, get back up. However many times you get knocked down, you get right back up one more time. Every time you get your heart broken, you say, okay, I got my heart broken, but I'm going to love again. I'm going to step back in. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to allow myself to love one more time again, as many times as it takes. So no matter what the universe throws at you, the resilience to say, I can withstand this blow, and I can step back and become greater and more and stronger because of it. And I'm going to come back better. And everybody who's had anything difficult come at them, they build this energy of resilience, which is necessary for the fight, because you're not going to win any battle. And if you did, you wouldn't eventually be as good as you needed to be, because it's actually the times where we fall, the times where we're crushed and broken. Those are the times that actually define the warrior. You can't see any hero's tale where they don't get their ass kicked at some point. It's part of our hero's journey. And the resilience is the willingness to step back in fully into your warrior poet so that you can continue the fight and continue your mission to be the very best person that you can possibly be. So this covers the first 3 tenets of the warrior poet ethos. And I'm excited to share in a subsequent podcast to continue this theme and go through the last 2 tenets, which are also equally and vitally important to living out these archetypes. And these archetypes, they're guide stars. They're the lodestar in the night sky. They're the way that we navigate the ship of our soul towards something. And so if you actually really look at these, the warrior and the poet, the sword and the rose, if you look at these as guide stars, it can hopefully do what it's done for me and help guide you on your path to living the best fucking life you can live, because it's so good. It really is so good. And it's so painful, so painful. One of the things that my teacher, Rebbe Gaffney, says is the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. Is to actually meet that force of all of the difficulty and all of the challenge with the maximum amount of love that you can bring as the antidote to all of the pain. So that's the nature of the warrior poet ethos. So to all my warrior poets out there, I love you. Keep going. We're in this together. Your fight is unique and absolutely personal to you, but it's also universal. One of the things that my teacher, Don Howard, said is that the warrior's heart beats as one. So as you're on your own journey, you're on your own quest to be the warrior poet, there are so many other warrior poets that are out there with you, that have your back, and we're all going to do this together and make it through this long, dark night and into a more beautiful world. I love you all, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe, follow me at Aubrey Marcus, check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere, and leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.